us to record. See if it allows you. Okay, I can see your recording.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so you can go back to present now. Okay, so we've all learned something, how to allow you to record. Okay.
Okay.
Hey, can we start? Okay, hello everyone. Hello again. We are group 3 and we'll be presenting case study 2. Can everyone hear me? Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm Sobisi Jula. We'll be taking you guys through the background of Unilever, and then we'll be followed by Aisha Osman, who will be talking about the business model, and then Lumiso will be talking about 6 processes and the technologies that we've identified, and Magdalene will then follow him. She'll be presenting the alignment model, and then Kylie will be presenting the strategic grid. So what is Unilever? Unilever is a multinational corporation selling consumer goods, including foods, beverages, cleaning agents, and personal care products. Okay, they own more than 400 brands, and Unilever employs well over 163 people in around 100 countries, including South Africa. And then their products are sold in many countries worldwide. Okay. They are the global market leader in all the food categories they operate in, with 264 manufacturing sites worldwide, all of which aligns with the values of safety, efficiency, quality, and environmental impact. Half of the raw materials that they use comes from forestry and agriculture, and they buy approximately 12% of the world's black tea. If y'all don't know, black tea is like more oxidized and is generally stronger in flavor. 6% of its tomatoes and 3% of palm oil. Okay. Unilever's sustainable living plan sets out hundreds of targets and commitments, which all fall under 3 goals. Namely that by 2020, they plan to help more than 1 billion people improve their health and well-being. They plan to enhance the livelihoods of thousands of people in their supply chain. And they will, the one that we focus on more is that they want to halve the environmental footprint of making and use of products as we grow the business. Okay. The vision of Unilever is solely around that Unilever developed a strategy of decoupling growth from the environmental impact while increasing Unilever's positive social impact. Whereas it stems from what Coleman said, that the new vision would be to double the size of the company while reducing the overall impact of the environment or on the environment. Okay. Now, Magdalene will be taking you through the business model.
You know, Prince, I know Meg and I are good friends, but we have different names. Hi, I'm Aisha, and I'll be taking you through the Unilever's business model. So I know we've been doing this assignment for a very long time, and I'm sure what is a business model is coming out of everybody's ears. But for the sake of the presentation, I'm just going to mention what a business model is again. So a business model describes the alignment of a business's strategy with its capabilities required to execute that said strategy and the value generated for all their stakeholders. So it helps with the framing of decision-making and action throughout an organization. And if you look at the image there, you can see that they all lead into one another. They're not independent or where you start in one and then you move on to the next. All of them impact each other and all of them have an effect on each other. Okay, so now talking more specifically about Unilever. First, we look at their strategy. Going back into the 1900s, Unilever started implementing sustainability in the 1990s with the developing of the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative. So they ran 5 projects which led to...
Aisha?
Yes?
Aisha, one more. You need to slow down your pace a little bit.
Sorry, okay.
And the previous slide, one of the reasons it's done in a circular manner is to show you the circular nature so that there's no starting and end point.
Okay.
Okay.
Alright.
Continue.
Okay, so I think I'm saying, okay, they ran 5 projects, which then led to the development of the 10 sustainable agriculture indicators. And then in 2005, they embedded these indicators into all of their product brands. And then became the thing of brand imprint, which does a full scan on the economic and environmental impact of all products before they, while making them. As a complete chain. So by 2008, Unilever had a complete set of environmental impact metrics. Now, why is this important for business strategy? As Prince said earlier, one of their goals is revolving around sustainability. So it is important for business strategy because it allows them to position themselves in the product market as being conscious and responsible while furthering that sustainability goal. Right. So in the past decade or so, what has happened is you have this thing called the conscious consumer. So consumers have become more conscious about the social impacts and implications of their purchases, and they're only buying from those who they share their values and who's with whom they share their values. Specifically things like child labor and inhumane working conditions and so on. So Unilever, noticing the shift in the consumer, then they created a set of social metrics which allowed them to show their consumers their value chain and network, and it basically gave consumers a little bit more insight into how they operate their business. This would show consumers that Unilever did share their values and listen to their concerns. So now that we have an understanding a little bit of their strategy, let us look at their capabilities. If you take a company like Unilever, they have many stakeholders. They have investors, shareholders, same pretty much thing, customers, partners, and employees. Right. So when you're implementing sustainability, it's very often can be very expensive, and hence they must weigh the cost versus the benefits. And they do this with the SROI. All right, so being a major company, Unilever also may have a significant market share in some industries to actually change the whole industry practice to practice more in line with their goals and practices. It is also possible.
Aisha,
yes?
sorry, one moment. Okay, in terms of implementation of sustainability, so what I want us to do is I want us to go into Moodle, and we're going to give our impression of what sustainability is, right? And I want examples of sustainability. And as a clue, you mentioned a little while ago that they avoid child labor. Okay, so that's one of the things that actually allows them to become sustainable. Okay, everyone's following what I'm talking about? Yeah, I notice now a number of participants has increased, which is good. So we need to go into Moodle now. And in Moodle, we're going to look at what we mean by sustainability. I'll put the question up again in Moodle as well. Okay, so I'm actually going into Moodle. And to go into Moodle, whilst you have this screen, I think you all know how to use Alt-Tab. So you need to use Alt-Tab and get into Moodle itself. Okay, if you guys can switch your microphones off.
I'm sorry, guys. Which chat week are we on?
Case study 2.
Thanks.
Okay, guys. What we're going to do is we're going to just discuss some of the questions that came up. In fact, some people did have a question or two there. Okay, I'm also checking. Okay, so I say Tiara tried to reply to someone's question on WhatsApp. Okay, thank you. Okay, coming to sustainability, we need to look at what we actually mean by sustainability and the way things are actually changing. Okay, there are a few things that were mentioned. For example, I'm not sure who, but someone said in terms of the company replenishing the palm trees that they used. So in other words, you're using the palm trees for palm oil, and therefore you're replacing those palm trees. Okay, so that will also mean that they will have palm trees for the future. It's similar in the sense where when we actually have trees being cut to make paper, new trees are being planted so that we can have trees available to make paper at a later stage. But there's another aspect that we need to think about, okay? And look, if you need to interrupt me, as I said, either put your hand up or put your microphone on and interrupt me at any time, okay? You find in terms of the palm oil, what was happening in Mauritius a few years ago, and this was being done by the company Nestle. They were actually removing the natural forest and replacing it with palm trees. So that was not going to become very sustainable because you find that the natural habitat of the region was changing. And therefore they had quite a few strikes and so forth that occurred worldwide, demonstrating that Nestle was doing the wrong thing. And people were then starting to boycott Nestle products. So what happened thereafter, Nestle found that they're not going to be sustainable, and therefore they started, as they were using the palm trees, they were replacing that with a natural forest that was occurring out there. Okay? And you'd notice that even here in South Africa, there's been a drive to have natural plants that are growing around us instead of having, so therefore you talk about indigenous plants, which tend to use less water than other plants that you bring in. Okay, so just as a side in terms of sustainability. So in terms of a definition of sustainability, what we are really looking at is, if you're looking at a company being sustainable, that means they must be able to survive a longer period of time. Taking an easy example into account, if our electricity is being produced by coal, you find that there will come a time when we're not going to have any coal left. So in other words, electricity being produced by coal is not really sustainable because we're using the coal and we're not replenishing it. On the other hand, if we use electricity that's being produced by wind or by the sunlight, that becomes sustainable because you're using the renewable energy. Okay, and remember that that's an important thing to keep in mind in terms of what products you buy. Okay, and therefore you find at this stage that there's a lot of anti-China sentiment. And it says, you know what, we need to start looking at buying local. And that's in terms of being sustainable. As a country, for us to be sustainable and have more jobs in the country, then we need to start looking at buying local. Okay? And that actually helps in terms of sustainability. I am going to consider some other examples with sustainability so that before we go on to the case study into a little bit more depth in terms of the strategic grid and the alignment model, we start using this as background. Okay? So if we look at, I think someone, I'm not too sure who, mentioned that if you reuse things, then that will be sustainable, okay? That is also to a certain extent. For example, an easy example with that would be plastic bags. So if you're going to reuse plastic bags, that means there'll be less of the plastic bags that are going to go into the environment. And by less of the plastic bags going into the environment, you find that the natural habitat will not have so much of plastic being thrown. Because I think you are aware that plastic takes over a century to disintegrate. So the amount of plastic that we've got around, it means that we are not going to be sustainable with so much of plastic around us. Because even the sea life is tending to eat plastic because plastic's in our oceans. As an initiative here, you find, I'm not sure if anyone's heard of this company, Coca-Cola. Anyone heard of them? No one.
Yes, sir, we heard of them.
No, sir, we haven't heard of them.
They haven't heard of them. Okay? Okay, what they are going to be doing, in fact, it will, I'm sure this COVID-19 would have actually slowed it down as well. They are going to have where you actually return your bottles. Although it's going to be plastic, but they are putting in place a system where you actually return your bottles so that they can actually recycle them. Okay, so we're going back to the older system that used to be in place where we used to return the glass bottles and get in other words, you pay a deposit for it and then you return it so that you can then have proper disposal of it. Okay. Another aspect in terms of sustainability, and when we're looking at our electronic equipment, I mean like our laptops, our cell phones, anything electronic, okay? You find what is being built into the cost of the electronic equipment is proper disposal. So in other words, when you are actually finished with the use of it or the lifespan of that electronic device, then you actually return it and you dispose of it correctly. Okay? Because I'm sure a number of you have your old phones lying around and that kind of thing. And invariably, that will actually land up in a landfill where it will cause more issues. Okay, so I'm going to take another example in terms of sustainability. If we take an example like Checkers, okay, I think all of you are familiar with that. How are they being sustainable? It means that when they are buying products, they must be able to trace where they're getting those products from, and those products are being used in a proper environment. So in other words, one of the things I think someone asked was in terms of child labor. How does child labor actually help in sustainability? Okay, child labor is one of the important aspects, okay, in terms of it. One, it's not ethical to use child labor. In fact, by not using child labor, you are actually encouraging children to be children and also to be able to study. Okay? Because if they are working, they're not going to be able to study and get further in life. And that's one of the reasons why you find that places like China is actually discouraged, because they use child labor to quite an extent. Okay, so are there any questions about that before we move on with the presentation?
No, sir.
Okay, so Aisha, you can continue.
Okay. I'm just going to go back a point and say, okay, so Unilever is, as we know, a major company, as Cynthia has told us how worldwide they are, and therefore they can actually change practices in a complete industry. Right. It is also possible for Unilever to require their partners to have specific third-party certifications in order to stay in business with them. And I found this was particularly interesting because when you're looking at a third-party certification, you're actually involving other people, and there's a lot of talk about people actually buying off their certifications. So I was actually interested in trying to figure out how you would actually get around that kind of curve, but unfortunately, Google was not that helpful there. And also, lastly, Unilever also makes use of their brand to ensure that those who they partner with are in line with their values via their business partner code. All right, so carrying on with their capabilities in achieving. Yes.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you're emphasizing the value. So in other words, what you're looking at. So Unilever is actually partnering with people or companies that have the same values. Okay, why is that important?
It's important because yes. Okay, sorry.
Okay,
That's what I was asking.
No. Okay. We could go back to Moodle and get some answers, but if not, okay, in terms of time, I'll actually continue with it, right? So what you find happening here is, even when you as an employee or prospective employee wants to get to the company, that's one of the things that any company is going to check for, not only Unilever. They're going to check to see whether you have similar values to that company. And therefore, when you're going for an interview, you need to know the values of the company. Because the company will measure whether you have the intellectual capability by the qualification that you have. So they are not interested in your IQ. Your IQ is in terms of you actually attaining a certain degree or a certain qualification. What they are interested in is something called EQ. EQ, which is emotional quotient. So they're interested in your emotional quotient. And again, it does not mean that there's a single correct answer. Your emotional quotient would mean they're checking to see if you actually fit into the values of that company. Therefore, it's important when you're going for an interview to have an idea of the company and to see whether you're going to fit in. And if you don't fit in with the values of the company, it's better for you not to get a job with them, because then you would find that you would not be happy with them. Okay. So that's just for you. I'm not too sure how the job situation is going to work this year, but hopefully you are going to get jobs and some interviews coming up soon. Okay, so you can continue, Aisha.
Okay. So in achieving their purposes and goals, and the processes and infrastructure that is set and implemented by Unilever is actually very critical. And Unilever has set in motion various processes which will come up in our strategic grid and alignment model. I'm just going to give you an example now, such as the making and implementation of the SSRT, which assisted them with their goals and projects. Okay, now looking at value. When we look at value, an essential factor is loyalty. So loyalty from your customers, from your employees, from your partners. And Unilever works at attaining this loyalty from different stakeholders differently. So in terms of customers, they do this via crowdsourcing because this enables them to get back their customer insight and to hear back from their customers so the customers feel like they're a part of the company. They have also developed what is called trust-based networks with their partners. Now, trust-based networks deal with building long-term, strong relationships where all partners have a sense of loyalty to each other. This gives incentives to suppliers to move towards implementing Unilever's sustainability practices, because without this, suppliers might look at these practices as costing too much and being not worth it in the long run. And then they might, if they implement it, increase their prices, which will then drive up the prices of Unilever's products and have an impact on sales, which will return in the decrease of income, revenue, and profits. And we know that value is about increasing the returns for all of our stakeholders. So in that way, that is how a trust-based network actually has a long-term effect, covering for the word that is actually a long-term plan. And that is one of the things that Unilever has actually implemented. Okay, so if we take all of this and we put it together, our strategy, our capabilities, and our values, we come up with our business model. So as we know, Unilever believes that profitable growth should also be responsible growth. And this approach lies at the heart of their business model, which is driven by sustainable living. It guides their approach to how they do business and how they meet with the growing consumer demand for brands that actually act responsibly. Their business model begins with consumer insight that informs their brand innovation and often with partners in the supply chain to create products that they take to a market which aligns with their sustainability goals and values. The last thing I'm going to talk about before I hand you over to Indomiso is we looked at this thing about business model frameworks and we thought which ones do we think that they would fall into, and these are just some of those that we picked up that we thought they would fall into, namely a multi-stakeholder business model. As we know, big company, lots of stakeholders. Command and control business model. This has to do with how they have implemented their metrics, both social and environmental. And in that way, they actually are able to control who they are partnered with. The network effects model, I've spoken about the trust-based networks and crowdsourcing, and perhaps even more, because when I was looking at the frameworks, companies can actually fall into a few of them and then take these, hence why they're called frameworks, take them and join them and make their own business model. I'll now hand you over to Indomiso, who will talk about processes and technologies.
Hello once again. I am Domiso Mangwele, and I'll be discussing the processes and technologies associated with Unilever's business model. So, beginning with decision making, this process involves the identification of the categories within the company in which Unilever can implement their sustainability measures. And once they have identified the sustainability categories, the company will then prioritize them. And this is the second process, the prioritization of sustainability categories. Here, Unilever must order these categories according to the implementation of sustainability difficulty, like beginning with the categories that produce the most change with the least impact or with the least amount of effort. And then our third process is obtaining stakeholders' viewpoints, where Unilever must obtain the views of the stakeholders and use them to influence the order of prioritization. Then the fourth process is achieving supply chain compliance. In order to successfully achieve the goal of sustainability throughout the supply chain, they must make sure that all parts of the supply chain agree on the overall goal and practices of sustainability. For Unilever to obtain supply chain compliance, it is necessary for them to get verification of all the practices. This brings us to the fifth process, verification of practices. In order to achieve radical supply chain transparency, Unilever must be able to verify all the practices, both externally and internally. Finally, our sixth process is the overall implementation of sustainability measures. Here, Unilever must implement all practices related to sustainability throughout the supply chain. This is done in order to achieve the goals. Next slide, please.
Okay, just if you can go back to the previous slide, please. How does prioritize sustainability categories differ from implement sustainability measures?
Once the categories have been identified, I feel like there'll be like different levels of difficulties, like in implementing one. Like maybe the first category may be easier to implement, maybe compared to the third or the fifth. But then the prioritization includes like deciding which category will be implemented first. That's depending on which category will like bring the most change with the least amount of effort put in. Then when implementing the sustainability measures, that is like putting this into practice in order to achieve the sustainability.
Okay, just be careful of this kind of situation, okay? Because you actually fell into a trap that I asked. That's why I asked that question. Because when you are prioritizing, it does not mean that it's easy. It does not mean the easy ones go first. It means that you're going to look at, for the company, which one is going to bring about the most benefit to the company. So it could mean that you have an easy one that's not high on the priority list. So there's a fair amount of overlap between those two processes.
All right.
You can continue.
Okay, now I'm going to discuss the technologies and tools that are used like in these processes. Firstly, the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative was developed in the 1990s, like when Unilever first decided to start the process of becoming a fully sustainable company. And along with the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, Unilever identified the operational indicators and field projects in 1995. This was in order to help identify sections or categories in the company in which sustainable measures could be implemented. Then using the operational indicators, Unilever then created their brand imprint. This, along with the business partner code, was used to measure the environmental and social impact. And this was to ensure that suppliers meet the expectations. Then in 2008 and 9, they created the matrix for environmental and social impact areas, respectively. And this was in order to keep an eye on the effect their products would have on sustainability. Then in 2010, the Sustainable Agriculture Code document was developed like for strict adherence of sustainability in production, distribution, consumer use, as well as disposal of the products. And this was right from the production of raw materials. Then the next tool or technology is the SROI, which is the Sustainability Return on Investments. And this tool plays a role in showing stakeholders how the company is growing. And then the SSRT, which is the Sustainable Stakeholder Rating tool. This Excel-based tool is used to obtain stakeholders' viewpoints on the categories in which sustainability practices will be implemented. We then have the external certification schemes, the trust-based networks, crowdsourcing, and source map. And these tools and technologies help Unilever achieve radical supply chain transparency. And I'll hand over to Maggie or Magdalene to do the alignment model.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Magdalene and I will be presenting Unilever's alignment model to you. So before we discuss Unilever's alignment model, we need to understand the purpose of an alignment model in general, rather in terms of business. So the basic purpose of the alignment model is to show how business's IT aligns with their processes in terms of the company's strategies and capabilities. By using this definition, we have identified 6 main processes and technologies that align with Unilever's strategy. The first process is decision making. Here, Unilever must identify the categories within their business in which sustainability could possibly be implemented. The IT that best aligns with this would be the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative that was created in the 1990s, operational indicators, and project testing from 1995. These were used to identify specific areas within Unilever's supply chain that could possibly be used to implement sustainability with the least effect on the environment, socially, and with the most effect to the growth of their business. The second process is prioritizing these said sustainability categories.
Sorry, one moment. If you can go across, so what I'd like you to do is you looked at the business strategy, you looked at the IT strategy. Mm-hmm. If you can look at the business capability and the IT capability of the first process. So I'd like you to look at the process across first instead of looking at the other processes.
Okay, cool. So Aisha, do you wanna, yeah. Okay, so we kind of split it up to do capabilities and then strategies, but now we're going to do the strategy and then the capability look. So the first process here as well, decision making on the process of sustainability categories. This uses the same technologies, which would be the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, the operational indicators, and project field testing. In aligning this with the capabilities that Aisha mentioned earlier in our business model, we can see that these tools have been formed or created in the 1990s, and taking into consideration the timeline of this case study that we've done, these were tools that Unilever had already, and they had full capability of making these decisions and deciding on the categories in which they can implement sustainability. Aisha, you can go back to strategies.
No, in fact, the next part would be to look at value.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. So we just did an overall value for the entire thing. Okay, so here identifying if
it's fine if you're not doing it exactly as I'm asking. That's a learning process. Okay, so
okay, sure.
And the other thing that you've done is, okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to go back into Moodle, and if what you can do, go to the previous slide first. I want everyone to just jot down the processes, because you've identified the processes. So for example, in the business strategy decision-making process on sustainability categories, right? So jot down the processes that you've identified. But what I want to see now is I want to see the link between the business strategy and the information technology for that process. So you've identified from the case study these processes, but I want you now to tell me what is the link between the processes. Does everyone understand the question?
So you want us to tell you the link between the process and the technologies? Sorry, so we can't hear you.
So I think your connection dropped.
Oh, your mic is muted.
Yeah, no, what happened was, okay, you know, sometimes when you try to use the technology, I'm using the one where you temporarily switch the mic on by holding the space bar. So then I think my hand decided to leave the space bar, and then I carried on talking. Okay. So, okay, coming back to this, we leave the screen here on. And if we can just do that kind of link between business strategy and IT strategy first. So you can link point 1 to point 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. We will do that in Moodle so that everyone participates in that. Okay. welcome. Hi guys, we can start in Zoom again.
Okay, cool. Can I move on to the next processor? Sorry, so can we move on to the next process? Can't hear you.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
We're back in Zoom.
Okay, so can we move on to the next process?
Magdalene? You
So
ready?
can we move on?
Okay,
Yeah, I'm
before
ready.
we continue, so does everyone have an idea of what I'm looking at? So the first step is to identify the process. So before you can actually link the processes, you need to actually give a background and as an example from that, okay? So this first process in terms of sustainability, the easy way to try and answer that was in terms of not using child labor. So your IT associated with that would have to be some kind of check and to see that every employee is not below a certain age group. Okay. What I want to do is before we continue, I just want to mark the register, okay, because it's very difficult for me to try and, I was actually trying to do it on my own now in terms of the participants. Okay, I'll try again just now when you are answering something and we can then look at the register at the end. Okay. Magdalene, if you can continue.
Okay. So we move on to the second process. So that would be the prioritizing of the sustainability categories. So in this process, the categories that were identified prior to this in the first process must be prioritized in order of where sustainability measures can be implemented with the most benefit to the company and the least effect on the environment. So just to explain that process a little bit further, so giving an example would be the brand. So the information technology would be the brand imprint that was created in 2005, and that gave the brand team a holistic view of the impact that their technology, that their products were having on the environment and socially. So, for example, as I said, fertilizer. Soil was one of the operational indicators, and then you'd obviously have to prioritize this according to the stakeholders' viewpoints, which is our next process. But one of the stakeholders are farmers. So you would need to ask them or look at the effect that the soil they use or the products, the seeds and things like that they're using, and how that affects the environment and has a social effect on people. So the IT that we think aligns with that process would be the brand imprint, the metrics for social and environmental impact, the sustainable agriculture code, and the sustainable return on investment. So those technologies, after the brand imprint was used in 2005, Unilever collected information on the impact that they were having environmentally and socially. Therefore, in 2008 and 2009, they created the metrics for the areas in which they were impacting environmentally and socially. And in 2010, the Sustainable Agriculture Code. So that was the code to verify their operational indicators, their sustainability categories, and to say that they would stick and abide by these rules. Then also keeping in mind the goal of the company was to decouple company growth from environmental and social impact. That's where the sustainable return on investment came in. That showed the value that this process was having to the stakeholders and shareholders of the company. Yeah, Aisha, if you can move to the capabilities. Here again, prioritizing sustainability categories. The IT that aligns with that would be the brand imprint, the metrics for social and environmental impact, the sustainable agriculture code, and the sustainable return on investment. So here, again, basing it on the timeline of this article, these technologies were already obtained, the tools were built and ready to be used, and they fall under the capabilities of Unilever. If we look at aligning this process and the IT with the values, this falls under the important aspect of value is the increasing returns. So this, again, sustainable return on investment, it showed the value that this process had, the overall process of implementing sustainability to the shareholders and stakeholders in the company. I share back. So do you wanna discuss this process, or can I move on to the next one?
Okay, you see why sustainability is so important at this stage. You find that when we look at companies, previous way of a company reporting on how well they were doing was to actually just put out their financial reports. Okay, but now what we are looking at is you actually look at a report that's coordinated and overlaps on every other sector. So it's not like if you look at a company, any company for that matter, you try to look at what is their social responsibility as well to see whether they are sustainable or not. So in terms of that, that's the reason why sustainability has become so much more important. So it's not only the profit that they are making, but how are they making the profit? So if they are making a profit in a manner in which the company is sustainable, then it's actually a company that you can actually link up with. Therefore, you find companies like I said, Coca-Cola is looking at actually getting the deposit system back in place so that you can actually then return your bottles, or in this case, your plastic containers. Whether they actually recycle them or whether they reuse them is dependent on the company. Okay. You can go on to the next process now.
Maggie, just before you say something, like just me and what Sir was saying, like you actually noticed that they also they put out like a sustainability report, like Sir mentioned checkers earlier. They'd actually give out every, like how you would give an earnings report out yearly that you can access. They actually now you find that companies put out their sustainability report, and I thought that was also very just interesting to mention. Sorry for interrupting you, Maggie.
It's okay.
That's good, okay? If others have something to say, please, this is a learning situation.
Anybody else?
Okay, you can continue.
Okay. So the third process that we identified that falls in alignment with Unilever's strategy was obtaining stakeholders' viewpoints. So here, this process becomes of vital importance when prioritizing sustainability categories. So I'm pretty sure that all of us are familiar with the SSRT, so the Sustainability Stakeholders Rating Tool. This is where we need stakeholders' viewpoints. And if we're going to just quickly align that with the values of Unilever, one of their core values is communication with their partners. And that will fall into that category because they're taking in the valid opinions of the people involved in their supply chain. So the IT that best aligns with this process would be the sustainable return on investment and the sustainability stakeholders rating tool. These technologies help Unilever obtain the viewpoints of the farmers, customers, company shareholders, and the overall impact on the environment by showing how these various categories are viewed across the supply chain and the sustainable return on investment for the company. So again, this falls into line with what Paul Pullman said in 2009, that they wish to grow the company, but lessen their carbon footprint, basically. Actually, you can move to strategies. To capabilities. So this process, of course, falls under capabilities as well, because the tools that fall in line with it in the timeline of this case study was already obtained by Unilever. And it was a process that would happen within the company. So their branding team or their sustainability team would send out surveys or questionnaires or so, basically asking for data back from these stakeholders. And this would allow them to prioritize the sustainability categories in order, as I was saying earlier, not necessarily the easiest to do, but in the order of where it would benefit the company and it would lessen their impact on the environment and socially. So an example from what I was saying earlier would be the fertilizers. Here, a stakeholder is the farmer. And the fertilizer soil was one of the operational indicators. So you get their viewpoints because they're out in the fields or the farms or wherever, and they know what's best for their soil. So you take that into consideration, as with the sustainability measures, and you meet somewhere in the middle to say that, okay, this is ethical, this doesn't impact the people around us socially, and it doesn't have that much of an impact on the environment. Therefore, we can go forward and use this. Aisha, next one. Okay, so then moving on to our fourth process. The fourth process under strategy would be supply chain compliance. This is vital for the company to get the entire supply chain to agree with the implementation of sustainability throughout the said categories or sections of the business. So this is basically the technologies that would align with this process would be third-party certification, trust-based networks, crowdsourcing, and source map. These technologies help Unilever draw compliance throughout their entire supply chain. So as I was saying earlier, so verification of practices like child labor laws. A company like Unilever is big, and if they were, we can use the term busted for something like child labor, then it would be a big story. So in order to verify their practices are good and ethical and have less harm socially and environmentally, they adopted third-party certification schemes, and trust-based networks. So they were able to get verification within the company and out of the company to satisfy the shareholders of the company. This falls into, this does not align with their capabilities because it's something that has to be drawn out over a few years. However, it does align with their value in developing trust-based networks with their partners. So here again, it shows that everybody's input that's part of the company is valid and that everything will be done ethically and good. Aisha? Oh, you can't, never mind. The fifth process is verification of practices. In order to obtain radical supply chain transparency, meaning that customers and all shareholders and stakeholders of Unilever can see the practices and their processes, Unilever needs to verify these practices. And the IT that aligns with this process would be third-party certification schemes and trust-based networks. As I've stated before, this falls into the internal and external verification of their practices. These IT tools provide the verification for the company. And again, this falls under their capabilities as well. I'm sure you can go to the next one. Yeah, so here, the external certification schemes and trust-based networks, those are things that the company themselves would implement, and their stakeholders are already there. It's things that can be done within the capabilities of Unilever. It's not necessarily dependent on any other thing like the supply chain compliance. That would be over a year-long thing because they'd need to implement it in each category over and over again using the SSRT. This aligns again with their value of communication and trust-based networks with their partners. Aisha, go back. Okay, so the sixth and final process that falls under Unilever strategy would be the implementation of these sustainability measures. After completing the first 5 prior processes, all that's left to do is implement the sustainability measures through the selected categories. But this needs to be done in accordance to the viewpoints of stakeholders, the return on investment, and the impact that it has socially and environmentally. The IT that best aligns with these processes would be the sustainable return on investment and the sustainability stakeholders rating tools. These technologies allow Unilever to collect valuable information needed to make their decisions. So here again, the sustainability stakeholders rating tool that combines the operational indicators, the categories, the viewpoints of the stakeholders, all into one tool that can be used to give Unilever the information that they need to decide on which categories could possibly be up for implementation sooner than the others. This doesn't fall under capabilities just yet because Unilever needs to achieve supply chain compliance in order for the implementation to be complete. However, this does align with all of their values, which is loyalty with all customers, developing trust-based networks with partners, which serve as incentives for suppliers, little sale impact, and increasing returns. And now that we've identified all the processes and how they fall under the capabilities and values of Unilever, we have therefore identified their alignment model, and we'll be moving on to the strategic grid. And I'll hand you over to Kailesh to explain it. Thank you.
Okay, before we go on to the strategic grid, what was important is, remember we went through the first one just to give you an idea of how to actually link it and so forth. So that would be for your write-up on those processes for the alignment model. What was very important that came through here, but I want to highlight it, you would notice that some of those processes had overlap with other aspects. So some things, for example, SSRT, you found it in more than one place. Okay, so and there's nothing wrong with that. So you will find that yeah, okay, she's pointing out where you've got SSRT under point 3 and under point 6. And then also, if you go to capabilities, if you go to the next slide. Yeah, okay, you find it under there as well. Okay, so and that's actually absolutely fine. Yeah, how did you get that pointer thing to work?
That's in PowerPoint.
Okay.
PowerPoint allows you to use that pointer.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. You see, we're always learning some things with this. No, I didn't. So I saw that it seemed interesting. Okay.
I think so.
Okay, sorry.
No, I said I was going to say, I think if you like to mess around with technology, you learn a lot of things. I like to interfere with things, but sometimes like that. And I learn all these little things that just actually help there.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. Okay. That's a mindset you should be having for IT anyway.
So just one more thing I want to, just one more thing that I wanted to point out with it. As you stated earlier, so the picture that Aisha put up with the business model of the strategies and capabilities and values in a circular motion, that would be how all our processes flow one into the other. And that's how the technology is kind of mixed in them as well.
Okay, that's good, because you find that there's no start and end point. And in terms of a business, it does not mean that they're going to use one process first and then the other. So it's not in a sequential manner. You continue?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kailesh Ngobo, and I'm going to be presenting the strategic grid. So we have drawn a strategic grid for each of the processes identified in the previous slide. So we'll start by the first process, which is the decision-making process. well, I will not further explain this process as Magdalene did explain what it is all about. And you will notice that in this quadrant, there are some percentages associated with each process. And these are just assumptions on how each process fits in within the grid. So the first process is the decision making, as I've said, and on each grid, you'll notice that there are some tools that are associated with these processes as well. So Ndumiso did explain how these tools, and then my aim or my role here is to explain how these processes shift within the strategic grid. So at the beginning of the case study, this process was important, but not very critical. So we placed it in the support quadrant, as you can see here, giving it a contribution of 30%. And then later on, Unilever.
Okay, sorry. I think, look, remember your explanation has to be in terms of its impact on strategy and its impact on operations. Just a few questions first before you go on with. Why don't you have the lines in the IT impact on core strategy, the red line? Why is it not intersecting with the IT impact on core strategy?
I think that was just like an error in when you're making the PowerPoint.
Okay, so make sure that they do intersect. Right.
All right.
That's one. And two, if you look at I'm looking within the support quadrant. Can you see the S for sustainable? And, and if you look at the G for testing, can you see what a big variance that is? Therefore, it's actually better to number it. Can you understand what I'm saying? So in other words, where the word sustainable is and where the word testing is, sustainable is a lot higher in operations. And testing is a lot higher in terms of strategy and a lot lower than sustainable in terms of operations.
So, but like, doesn't if you intend to do that, it's okay because like you're trying to show that it has a higher impact on operations rather than like it increases in the turnaround quadrant?
Sorry, I'm trying to, okay, yes, I hear what you're saying, but what I'm saying is your diagram itself, can you see within the diagram, it's actually showing too big a variation. Therefore, you tend to use a number rather than typing within it. Okay. For explanation purposes, this is fine, but do you understand what I'm trying, my point about it? Because to me, it shows that the word sustainable is higher in operations and than testing, and testing is high in terms of strategy.
I get what Sir is saying. The way we put them in the order we put them in terms of project test, field testing should have went first because it's more higher and that. Okay, I get what Sir is saying.
Therefore, if you just put a if you had a
if you number
block,
it, okay, and then what Sir's point is.
Okay, the others, do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, sir. I get what you're saying.
Okay. Can we continue?
Okay, so next we will look at the final process which we identified, which is the prioritization of sustainability will be implemented, and this process became of high value to the company's operation, causing it to move to the strategic quadrant. You'll notice here, no, we're not there yet. Okay, you'll notice that we didn't put we didn't put this process in the factory quadrant because once these categories in the company have been identified, there is no longer a need for this process. So you can go on to the next process, which is process 2. Okay, so here we initially placed technologies in the turnaround quadrant.
So, sorry, if you can go back to the previous slide. You said you didn't put it in the factory. Why?
Okay, I didn't put in the factory quadrant because once the categories in the company have been identified, I think there is no longer a need for this process. This was from my perspective. I don't know. You can correct me, sir, because now.
So can I just say something really quick?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I'm not sure whether that's exactly what Kylie meant, but when we were doing it, we decided that it would have a higher impact on operations, and it would stay in strategic because strategic is where it would be for future ventures. So here, the decision-making process on the categories will always be changing for the future of implementing them. Factory is to sustain the current operations of the company, and there was no need for the decision-making process of the categories in factory. So it would always be something that was needed for their future venture. That's the way we looked at it.
Yeah, so therefore you find what I did say was your explanation has to be in terms of strategy and operations, because by putting it into turnaround, you had to show that basically it was a strategic initiative within the company. And in terms of this, it would have meant that the decision to actually implement this process was a high level decision from the board level. So therefore it would have been strategic. And then your explanation in terms of going into the strategic quadrant would have meant after it's put into operation, in other words, sorry, after it's implemented, its core operations increases. And therefore it goes into the strategic quadrant. But then you also need to look at, in terms of the competitors, are the competitors using a similar kind of system? And if the competitors are not using a similar kind of system, it stays in strategic. But if competitors are using a similar kind of system, then you're actually looking at, if you can remember the article by Nicholas Carr, that would then mean that it becomes commonplace and then it goes to the factory quadrant. Okay.
Because it loses its impact on core strategy.
Yeah, so remember that the explanation with this grid has to be in terms of strategy and operations. Okay, so in light of this, the fact that, and what made me look at it a little more closely is he said it disappears from the grid. Okay, so be careful of those kind of comments. But the other one that's fairly interesting, which I'd like someone to tell me why, in the support quadrant, it's 30%, and then it grows to 50% in the turnaround, and then to 20%.
Okay, so that was just like our estimations of its importance in each of those quadrants. So the first process had a higher impact on the core strategy than, a higher impact on core strategy. That's why it moved to the turnaround quadrant. And that was to say that it was important. Yeah, I know, and then you want to know why this.
The percentages are in relation to the overall company. So you had 6 processes, right? With the 6 processes, that was from the alignment model, and you don't have to use all from there. So when you're looking at the 6 processes, and remember I told you that they don't even have to add up to 100, because you see, this is why I'm questioning this, right? The reason they don't have to add up to 100, because a company may actually have maybe 12 processes and you only explaining 6 or 5, right? So therefore they don't have to add up to 100.
That's where our confusion was. So each process has their technologies and their contribution. Yeah, a percentage. Each process has like their own 100%. That's why it was split like that.
Okay, yeah, but I can see that this adds up to 100%. But you find that the impact on the company as a whole wouldn't go from 30 to 50%. If it was a 30, it would probably stay at 30, or it may drop to 25 or something like that, but not that drastic.
Okay, so I think
the others, do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do understand.
Yes, I think we looked at it per process rather than overall of the company.
Lisa. I have a question. According to the changes of the processes percentage, you were mentioning something about numbering of the processes. I was thinking about it, but can you please provide further clarification regarding um, labeling the processes?
Okay, I will show you a diagram a little later when they are done. Okay, I'll show it to you from another assignment or someone else's work. Right.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we will look at how the strategic grid should look after they've completed. Okay. Okay, if we can continue.
Okay, so moving further to the next process, which is all about the prioritization of sustainability categories. And the tools that are aligned with this process are the brand imprint, the metric for environmental impact areas, the metric for social impact areas, the sustainability agriculture code, and the SROI. So initially we placed them in the turnaround quadrant as they are important and critical to the overall goal of achieving sustainability throughout Unilever. And the tools and technologies contribute to the strategy more than operations. I think the explanation aligns with what you have said, sir. And then these technologies contribute more to core operations and move up to the strategic quadrant, where it becomes more relevant for future operations of the company. And then next, we're gonna be moving onto the third process. And this process is all about obtaining stakeholders' viewpoint. And the tools that are associated with this process are the SROI and the SSRT tool. So here initially we placed them in the turnaround quadrant as they are important and critical to the overall goal of achieving the sustainability at Unilever. And the tools and technologies contribute to the strategy more than the operations. And then we then place these tools and technologies in the strategic quadrant as they contribute more to operations. Yeah, as they contribute more to operations. And then the next process will be the fourth process, which is Aisha, the fourth process. And the fourth process is all about the supply chain compliance. And the tools that are associated with this process are the external certification, trust-based networks, crowdsourcing, and the source map. So this process and its technologies are of high strategic value to the company. However, at the beginning, they are not very important to operations. So we therefore place them in the turnaround quadrant. So moving further, these technologies became critical factors in contributing to the supply chain compliance. So it shifts into the strategic quadrant. And then we
Okay, sorry. Let's just look at some terminology that you need to use, okay? For example, if something's in the turnaround quadrant, you don't say that it's not important to operations. It's basically that it's in development. So, okay, so you're developing that process, and therefore it's not yet in operations. And once it's implemented, it becomes high in operations, and therefore it goes into the strategic quadrant. Okay, and keep in mind your reasoning for this has to be in terms of strategy and operations. I can't emphasize that enough. Okay, if you can continue.
Okay, so we then placed it into the factory quadrant because Unilever wants to achieve radical supply chain compliance, radical supply chain transparency and supply chain compliance. So it will be needed for future operations or within the company. And then next, we're gonna be looking at the fifth process.
See again here, when you're moving it into factory, your argument should be in terms of it becoming common and other companies, competitors using it, or you need to look at it not really having a strategic advantage again, okay? And as an example of that, remember I told you in terms of the banking system, when FNB started off with the cell phone banking, it actually gave them a strategic advantage. But now all the banks are using cell phone banking, so it's no longer a strategic advantage. So it would have moved from the strategic quadrant to the factory quadrant. Okay, do you have an idea of what I'm talking about? Yeah. So again, remember the argument is in terms of strategy and operations. Okay, continue.
Okay, so next we're gonna be looking at the fifth process, which is verification of practices. And the tools that are associated with this process are the external certification and trust-based network. So initially, this process is in a turnaround quadrant because it is very important for Unilever when trying to achieve their goal. So they are being strategic in this quadrant. So we then move it into the strategic quadrant. Okay, so when compliance has been achieved, and in order to move forward with strategy, we place it in the strategic quadrant where it is of high impact to operations. As you mentioned, said that when it moves or going or impacting high into operations, then it should move into the strategic quadrant. And then finally, it's moved into the factory quadrants. Once Unilever achieves their goal, it becomes necessary for the company to obtain a certification on a regular basis. And then the next process will be is the actual implementation of measures. Okay, so the tools that are associated with this process are the SROI, the SSRT, and the source map. So we place this process on the strategic quadrant because of high impact to operations and strategy by means of carrying out or achieving the company's goal and putting it into action what needs to be done in order to achieve their goal. And then we then place.
Okay, so why did you start off in the strategic quadrant? When was this developed?
Okay, we thought we should put it on the strategic because now we are actually implementing these sustainability measures.
No. Okay, you see, in here, remember we spoke about the timeline of the case. So, in other words, when you came across these applications, in terms of the timeline of the case, they were already developed and they were implemented. Therefore, you put them in a strategic quadrant.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So the reason why we jumped the turnaround quadrant is that we are not in the stage where we are dealing with the development phase. So that's how we thought about it. Because now we are actually implementing it, as you explained.
And that these tools have high value to the operations of the company, as well as the strategy.
So you see that we've had some real-time learning, okay? You can continue.
Yeah. Okay, so we then placed it into the factory quadrant as the tools in this process will be needed to continue with the current operations once sustainability has been achieved. So that was it for the strategic grid.
Okay, but you didn't tell me why it went from the strategic quadrant. Why did the strategy lower? You see, there your explanation has to be in terms of it becoming commonplace. So becoming common, so being used by other companies.
Yeah, other companies, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the other argument that we also had was it moved to factory because operations stayed the same, and it also had an impact on the current application. So once sustainability measures were implemented, these technologies needed to be used to keep up the current processes. And then obviously, as you said, it became common technology, therefore it lowered on strategy.
Okay, so see, you've implied that the strategy was lowered, okay? So it doesn't only have to be common. So in other words, it didn't have such a strategic part in the company as well, which show you why it moves from the strategic quadrant to the factory quadrant. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You continue?
Okay, so that was it for the strategic grid. Okay, thanks for watching and listening to our presentation.
Okay, thank you. What we're going to do is, look, we're going to go and I'm going to mark the register, and we're going to sort out marks, and we'll sort out marks for the presentation. And there's one important part of the strategic grid that was actually missing, but I told you that I will show you another one with the strategic grid the way I actually would prefer it, okay? So if you can bear with me for less than a minute, I'm just going to call up another file, okay? Okay, I'm back. I'm going to share a screen. Can all of you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, if you look at this, I don't have numbering right through. So this is one of the students actually did this. So I actually looked at it and said it's in terms of the technique to be used. So can everyone see process one? The process one, where I've got it here in the support quadrant, and then it moved into the strategic quadrant. Okay. So this is why I said you're using a smaller circle and so forth to show that how it is moving. So that's process one. Process two moved from here to here, from turnaround to the strategic quadrant. Process three moved from turnaround to strategic to factory. Okay. But what's important in this diagram is that notice that they've used different colors so you could actually identify the processes. Now this square, can everyone see my mouse movement? Can you see my mouse moving?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
No. Yes, okay. So this is now the company. So this is where the company was initially. After process 1, the company moved there. After process 2, the company actually moved down this way. So in other words, it came towards the left in the strategic quadrant. The next process took it there, and so forth. Okay, and that's the kind of explanation that I'd like to see. So, and this is where the percentage that you had actually helps. So process 1, if you said had an impact of 10% in the company, so that 10% impact, which moved the process from here to there, moved the company from here to here. Do you have an understanding? You'd probably have to switch your mics on. Do you have an understanding of what I'm looking at?
Yes, sir. You can see that it shows the movement of the IT in the company.
Yeah. So please don't worry about assignment 1 now, because that's done and dusted. Okay. So we're looking at it for future and for next week's case study and so forth. Okay. Anyone with any questions? No. Okay. What we're going to do is I'm going to actually open up my Excel spreadsheet, and okay, maybe that would be better if I share the screen. It will be quicker for me to try and identify everyone and go from there. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this. But in the meantime, if you can all switch your microphones on, because I want a brief idea about how much you benefited from today's session, because it was actually based on the assignment. Okay, so if you can talk, anyone, if you can just put up your hand and talk, or you can just talk us through that, that's fine. So who wants to start? The benefit, someone that didn't present, it would be good. No one wants to start.
I felt that it benefited us in that we better understood the alignment model and strategic grid to apply it in our case studies next week and to our assignments. And we did learn more about Unilever's values and how they have transitioned as a company, and that was very insightful. Thank you for presenting.
Okay. Tiara, I didn't ask for a compliment about it. I was just asking in terms of it. Okay, it doesn't mean you're gonna get. Okay. What I'm basically getting at. So, anyone else? Do you find that because you worked through this, that you benefited more?
So I know you said no one that was presenting should answer first, but
yes.
like it did benefit us, because from something that we try to understand on our own for like practically 2 months or so, and then doing it now and then getting a step-by-step basically learning as you tell us, it's kind of more of a learning curve for us than from an article that we haven't been seeing before.
So in fact, the fact that it was based on an assignment did actually help, and I did that intentionally in terms of that. Okay? Now I'm sure that all of you, okay, those of you that do know me obviously know there's obviously some reason for me asking this question and that kind of thing. Okay. So basically the reason for asking this question is that you'd find that if you are forced to actually do the strategic grid and alignment model, you're going to actually learn a lot more from the case study. Okay. So going to the next part. Okay, I see someone's interfering with the dogs. I hope you're not robbing someone, okay? That the dog is interfering with you.
Sorry, so I think that's me. It's like my neighbors have like 4 dogs each, and it goes on.
Yeah, no, it's fine. In fact, I heard the Haridas earlier with someone, and I have the same problem, the Haridas and the dogs and so forth. Okay, so that's part of working from home. Right, so for next week, and please listen very carefully. So what I'm asking, besides the group that's presenting, I want the entire class to do the strategic grid and the alignment model. You don't have to do it for 5 obviously the group that's presenting will do it for 5 processes. The others can do it for 3 processes. okay? And for next week, I'm not going to ask you to hand it in beforehand. I'm going to take it for granted. And look, I will obviously ask some questions and I'll have an idea of whether you did it or not. But for next week, I'll leave it at that. So it's going to be intrinsic motivation. You motivate yourself to do it. If I find I don't have enough people doing it on their own, the following week, I'll make it extrinsic motivation, where I'll actually ask you to hand it in for some marks. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen so you can help me with the register, and you need to tell me what mark you think you deserve for today's session. And the reason for that, and also if you presented, tell me that you presented so that I can mark it on this the sheet itself, okay? Because I'll actually enter it into the other sheet a little later. So, okay, so can you see the screen? So first person is Mokena.
So am I supposed to say my mark?
Obviously, your contribution.
6. Sir.
Okay, and is this verifiable from Moodle? Because obviously, if I go to Moodle and find that you said nothing in Moodle, then I'm going to give you 0.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's verifiable from Moodle.
Yes, sir.
6, okay. Nikhil?
Hi, sir. I joined a bit late, so I think 4 or 5 would be fine. I managed to answer one question on Moodle, unfortunately.
Okay. You mean fortunately? Okay, we'll give you 5.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Keegan?
Sir, he's not present at this call. I think he emailed you about it.
Ishan?
Hi, so I think 7 is fine. I did answer a few questions and learned a lot today. So, yeah.
Zuzo?
I think 7 is fine, sir. I did answer a few questions.
And this is verifiable, eh?
Yes, you can verify on Moodle, no problem.
Tiara?
I think 8. I learned a lot. I tried my best. I gave an example about the palm oil sustainability that Unilever has achieved. And thank you.
Okay. After I enter the mark, can you see the mark?
Yes, we can see the mark after.
Yes,
So.
you can see.
Okay. Kaya?
Please give me 7, sir.
It's not what I'm giving you. Is it verifiable?
Yeah, it's verifiable. You can check my answers on Moodle. And also, I was presenting, so yeah. Do I need?
Okay, please tell me when you're presenting, because I need to know that as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Rhodas?
I think 7, sir, because I did participate in the questions. Yeah, and I learned a lot.
Okay. And you didn't present?
No, I didn't.
Sianda?
I answered one question on Moodle, so maybe 5 or 6.
Okay. We'll accept 5. You presented, Sianda?
No, it was my first time.
Okay. The VC?
So I think maybe an 8, because I did attempt to answer all questions on Moodle, even though some I didn't get a chance, and I was present.
You presented as well. Siabonga?
I think it's not here.
Not here. Manila? Mbila?
It's Minette, sir.
Sorry again?
It's Minette.
Minella. Okay. What mark?
Minette.
Sorry?
5. 5, sir. I'm good with 5. Yeah.
You're good with 5. You saw that because you're just present. Did you answer any questions?
Yeah. Only one movie, sir. And it was my first time.
Mahavir?
6, sir.
Pronounce your name again. I know I get it wrong all the time.
Who, sir?
Your name, your first name.
Oh, Shayur, sir.
Okay, that's why I get it wrong, because I can't get that from the spelling. Okay, so I should make it a capital U, eh?
Yeah, so or you could put a Y there, but like I don't know, they left it out at the birth certificate.
Okay. So not my fault for pronouncing it wrong. I'm trying to go by
No,
the...
sir, not at all.
Okay. Sonali?
So I think a 7 because I try to answer whatever questions I could.
Sure.
Virgil? Virgil?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to unmute. I think 8 because I attempted every single question that we had on Moodle and tried my best.
Madhuri?
I think 7 because I answered all the questions and I learned a lot today.
Okay, and you presented, I think. Okay, so
No, I didn't present.
you didn't present. Okay. Sishla?
Oh, say I think 7. Like given I was having network problem, but I managed to answer all the questions.
Lungani? Mohammed?
Sir, 7. I attempted all questions and I learned a lot.
Magdalene?
Hi, sir. Maybe a 9 or 10 because I did answer all the questions in detail and I was presenting as well.
Okay. Aisha?
Maybe a 9 or 10 because I answered all the questions and I also was presenting.
Okay. Duniso?
I think 7 because I did participate in Moodle, answered questions, and I was presenting.
Presenting as well. Kosi Hono?
I think 6 or 6.5 would be enough because I was also participating on Moodle.
No, we'll leave it at 6, okay?
Okay, sir.
Okay, and you didn't present. Okay, that was the other. Need to just separate this. Okay. Anyone that I left out? No. And presenting was 2, 3, 5 people, 6 people, no, 5 people. Is that correct?
5 people, yes.
5 of us, sir.
Okay. So in terms of the presentation, had we stopped after the alignment model, I would have given you either 9.5 or 10, okay? Because I think the strategic grid let you down quite badly. So, and therefore, look, although I said 9.5 and 10 or 10 for the alignment model, there were things missing in terms, and you saw that when we went into Moodle, the way I wanted it done, okay? But because of the strategic grid, that brought that down quite a bit. So I'm actually going to give you, okay, being lenient, I'm giving you an 8. It would have actually been a 7. Okay, so presentation for today is an 8.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, so,
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so is there anything else that we need to discuss? In terms of the assignment due dates for the remaining 2 assignments and so forth, we'll settle with at a later stage. And those people that attended for the first time today, if you can email me, and then maybe I need to just talk to you because there's material that's on Moodle and so forth. You need to go through it. And remember that you're going to get maximum out of this by actually contributing in terms of the alignment model and the strategic grid. So the more you do with that, the better for you, okay? And you definitely will not be at a disadvantage because if you need any assistance with it, I will help you with it, okay? And so that's about it for today. And I think the most important thing is that I can say is you need to stay safe, and especially people in the higher risk areas like yourself, Aisha. Don't think that you are very strong. This virus is an absolutely devastating virus, okay?
I think so. I think you just have to keep praying and stay safe. I think take every precaution you possibly can.
Yeah, and the people that are back at residence, please don't walk around. Keep all that at a minimum, and only move around when you need to. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So I'll stop sharing that. And thank you. So we'll actually meet next week, and please actually go through that the case study and make sure that you do the strategic grid and the alignment model. Okay. Aisha, I'm not too sure. I'm not going to end your session because you need to see, because after recording, it actually does a coding. So,
Yes.
So what I'm not going to end the session, because if I end the session, it may just drop your recording. So I think you need to just stop the recording.
I don't think so. So I've actually recorded on Zoom before. I actually do tutoring on Zoom, so I don't think it will actually cause the problem. But I'll just stop the recording and let's see whether